Hey there, aspiring horror authors. It's another episode of Sako and the Moon podcast, created by two self published horror authors. The setting in a horror story plays a crucial role in establishing mood, building tension, uh, enhancing the overall sense of dread. Listen to how to try that again. Listen to how to effectively set into your horror story. My sentence didn't make sense. It didn't. If you're new here, I know English, I swear I do. If you're new here, I am Sako Toomey, artist and author, and a bunch of other things, but I will just mention that I'm a self-published author 3 times over. I've been working on my craft for decades, and now I'd like to share my skills with you guys.
She muted me again, but I unmuted me this time. I caught it
Okay.
this time. I am the one more affectionately known as the Moon, and this is the beautiful part about doing a live show. I love when things don't work. Like, that makes the show better, in my opinion, when things don't work, because that's authentic. You know, it's the reason why writers have editors, because we screw things up most of the time. I'm a doer of things. She's a doer of things. We do all kinds of things. And as independents, we do all of the things, which is why we have the infamous Omni hat.
Infamous, or?
Yeah, we're going to go with infamous because we talk about it all the time. And it's committed a couple of bank robberies.
It's committed a couple of bank robberies. Well, yeah, that's fair.
The getaway driver didn't make it. So
that's fair. So I have 8 sections with a couple of bullet points within it, where we basically tear apart the concept of setting in horror specifically.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with using atmosphere to build tension.
Okay.
Sensory details. So engage all 5 senses to create a vivid and immersive atmosphere. Describe the creaking of floorboards, the musty smell of an old house, or oppressive silence on a foggy night.
I think a lot of what you've mentioned just in that little bit, the fundamentals of horror is something scares us, right? And I teach my kids that the only thing that there really is that creates fear is a lack of knowledge. You know, your fear comes from what you don't know. So when you have a foggy night, you can't see what's in front of you. If you have, like in the movie Hush, where the woman was deaf, that created a sense of tension because she could not hear the guy who was just clearly right behind her. If you are blind or blinded by bright light or sudden darkness, those create moments where you don't know what's happening. So that all is part of that atmosphere that you're referring to. And it all ties into the unknown, right? That's what really scares us. It's the unknown. And our job as horror writers is to elaborate on that unknown, create such an unknown that the reader, the characters, everyone involved is scared because of a lack of knowledge. So we're taking those things away from our reader intentionally.
I think part of what you are, the part that I would like to discuss a little further is your use of dark and light.
Okay.
Right? So playing with light and shadows to create tension. Right? So dim lighting, flickering candles, total darkness can evoke fear of the unknown. The contrast between light and shadow can also symbolize safety versus danger.
Yeah. And it all goes, again, like you said, it's the fear of the unknown. If you, and of course, it'll be different because, we always kind of look at this both as in writing, in like a book, or in filmmaking, another part, specialty of mine. Then you create it differently. So when you're creating a scene, you have to make it dark or create tight quarters so there are things you cannot see, and creates that sense of unsafety. But when you're writing, you get so much more range because you get to tell the reader what the character can and cannot do, can and cannot see. Does that right? I think so. And so yeah, like you can have the power go out during the storm, as cliche as that is. The storm comes and you can't see ahead of you more than the hood of your car. That rain, that the fog, all those things that you like mentioned briefly before. And what that basically does, you're creating this very, very small space of safety. You're shrinking the safe space. When you put a person in a dark room, you're shrinking the safe space because now everything around them in that darkness, none of it's safe. So if you're writing this, think of it like that, shrinking your character's safe space, right? Eliminating what is comfortable around them so that they are uncomfortable. Create the discomfort by shrinking that safe space around them.
I think that's fair. Another thing that can help to make that space smaller and to kind of set the tone for the rest of the book would be the weather and the environment. So the environment can mirror the emotional tone of the story. A thunderstorm, dense fog, or oppressive heat can add layers of discomfort and foreboding in a lot of ways.
I mean, how many times, if you ever sat in the house when the heat's gone, like when the air conditioning's gone out in the middle of the summer, I mean, I find a place in America that has not been bombarded with heat this past summer, right? God bless the people in Arizona. Shout out to James Sabato. I don't know how you guys have done like a billion days, 100+ degrees temperature or whatever it is that you guys have been dealing with. But that's really, really uncomfortable in just a regular day without something going on. So you mentioned the heat, just irritability. If everyone's hot and irritable, that's just going to create tension between characters. Automatic. That's just general. That's going to happen in your real life. That's so relatable because as we've talked about this before, this doesn't work if it's not relatable, right? You mentioned the extreme cold. Think misery. You have conditions like icy roads, blizzards, just fighting the elements and just trying to like walk and navigate outdoors in the heavy cold. People taking advantage of those colds. You can take safety like campfires or indoor, safety like a campfire or a fireplace, whatever. Take those things away, add to that discomfort. We've already mentioned thunderstorms and fog and wet roads, and these conditions can lead to sabotage. It can lead to, someone out there trying to help you, and creates an environment where someone can easily take advantage of you. It's like, oh, let's cut their power in the middle of a blizzard, right? This person needs heat. Let me be the one to provide that heat. And you're so desperate for the heat given the cold, you've now trusted this stranger into your home and now they take advantage of you. Something as simple as that.
I think that this goes into our next point quite wonderfully, is integrating the setting with the plot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So environmental hazards, use the setting to create obstacles or threats that the characters must navigate. A collapsing bridge, a flooded basement, a thick forest that disorients the characters can increase tension.
Misery.
Misery.
It's like the number one example. Misery. You know, the writer's in the car, snowy, snow everywhere, slides off. She rescues him. Again, that's what I was kind of picturing when I was describing it. She rescues him. She brings him in. He has this full sense of safety because it's like, oh, this lovely person. She tried to help me until the sledgehammer came out. It gets really weird after that. But that's a perfect example. I've mentioned the descent on our show before, and that's an environmental situation where they're cave diving and their only known path collapses. So now they're seemingly trapped underground. No one knows where they are. That adds to the plot, the monsters. Mm-hmm. But it's by utilizing the environment in this, the setting to exacerbate a problem, create a situation where our characters make the mistakes. Because I've said a couple of times before, that's where horror starts. Horror starts when the mistakes are made. When you go left knowing you should have gone right, that's when the horror begins.
Yeah, absolutely. Another way that we can kind of set the setting as an active participant in the story would be to make the setting antagonistic in and of itself, right? So like haunted houses, cursed lands, sentient environments can all serve as antagonists in their own right.
Amityville. The Amityville house. That is, like Misery. There are so many examples where setting almost in itself is the antagonist. And Amityville, the Amityville horror is a prime example of that. They are fighting this house or any other place where you can't escape the cube, in a sense. So look at Cube. Mm-hmm. Cube is where the environment itself is the antagonist. And sure, you got some infighting amongst characters, but they're all fighting the cube.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really great way of having to just show exactly like you said, examples of where characters now have to interact with the environment itself, with the setting itself, whether it's the natural environment like a desert or a fabricated artificial environment like a haunted house, cubic structure, whatever, and how that in itself is what is being bought.
Absolutely. And I think one of the ways to kind of like bring life to that setting, to treat it like a character, to treat it like an antagonist, and give it a backstory. And like we have a backstory for the cube. We have a backstory for the Amityville house and foreboding and all of that stuff in that movie, book, things. And yeah, a place with a dark history, such as a town with a tragic past or a building with a reputation for hauntings, can add depth and intrigue.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So I agree with you 100% about how we, by establishing the backstory of our environment, the history of a space, just like in real life, understanding the history of a place really brings both character and meaning to what is happening and how that setting acts as a character in our story. Do you think that it is even scarier if we don't know the backstory of a place?
Well,
it's
13
just
ghosts.
a house with no backstory, no history. It's just like, oh no, this thing is just happening to us and we don't know why. I feel like that extra question.
The author knows the backstory, right? So like Ju-on, there is like a news feature on the murders and such in the house.
And that's the Japanese Grudge.
And that's the Japanese version of
Watch that. They're totally different.
Totally different. I'm sorry, say that question again. My brain.
So I was asking if because there's so much that we get from knowing about the background. Ju-on threw you off. That's what it was.
No, okay. So the viewer knows that there is the viewer knows that there is a history, but the main character does not. The character learns the story as it goes through the obstacles.
I kind of enjoy both, kind of on those sides of those extremes, where if you, let's say like the Ju-on house, since we're talking about Ju-on, the Ju-on house, anyone seen The Grudge, you know the deal. If you haven't, where have you been? But basically, mom, dad, child. Mom has a crush on teacher. She's kind of obsessive about it. She writes it down. Husband finds it. He freaks out. He kills mom. He kills kid. He kills himself. House is haunted. And it's tortured by anyone who walks into it. So you learn that backstory. It's spanned, 4 movies now? Not counting like 4 American movies. Grudge 1, 2, 3, and then the new remake they did like in 2020 or whatever it is. So everyone knows that backstory. But I wonder how it impacts or how it hits differently if there is no backstory. There is no history to the house that magically makes you want to, like, whatever, like, make you disappear. Or if we don't know what cursed the car in Christine, or the lack of knowledge and how everyone thrives for an answer and we don't get one. Do you think that that's cheating the audience, or is it only fair to do that to the characters? What's your thoughts on that?
I believe that the director, the author, should know everything about the house, everything about the setting, and what kind of obstacles can arise because of it.
Right.
So, yeah, I am of the mind that I know this is live.
It's what we do best.
It is. It is. We do so well. We do so well.
That's cool. Like, think about it. Go through the rest of your life. They'll hit you later.
Okay.
And if not, you can just always follow us on our socials. We'll talk about it later if it comes up.
And we'll talk about it on our socials and in our shorts, in our YouTube shorts, which I'm working on.
Oh, yeah. Sako got so much cool stuff. This is why this is what happens with Sako. I throw Sako off. She's so structured, and I'm not. So this is what happens with a lot of guys. I throw her off way off base. She's like, I have a list, dude. Like, I have points. I told you at the beginning of the show. I have bullet points. I just throw the whole thing off. I derail everything. That's on me. All right,
help me set chapters later.
This will be the moon rated here.
Okay, next, it would be using setting to amplify psychological horror. Right? So it's not necessary, like, I feel like the taking the safe space and making it smaller and smaller and smaller will make it less physical and more psychological.
Yes.
So suffocating small houses, narrow tunnels, locked rooms can all evoke feelings of claustrophobia and panic.
Which is one of the, I don't know how popular it is. I never bothered to look at the list, but dealing with like claustrophobia or fear of heights, if
Or
you
both.
can, or both, if you can put like a small room in a tall building, like those two things are so relatable because they're so commonplace, right? So many people get like elevators. What was it, the movie Devil? They were trapped in an elevator. There's that movie Fall where they're climbing a giant tower, like a cell tower or whatever. They're like hundreds of feet in the air. Stupid, but not so much the movie stupid. I'm just saying like the concept of climbing.
The concept is not great. Yeah.
Great. Not for me. I think the concept is not. You won't see my ass on top of the gigantic 400-foot tower unless I'm making six figures. That's just how that works. That's just me. But utilizing something so relatable allows for the audience to relate to the character. So when the character is experiencing the shrinking space, the audience is also feeling that shrinking space. Like you said, it's all in their minds. It's how you're thinking about it and feeling about it. You relate to who you're talking to. Even me, completely able-bodied, except for my knee, we don't talk about that, but completely able-bodied, watching a movie like Hush, where there's a killer stalking a deaf woman, you get drawn into that movie. You can hear everything. You're watching it happen. You can see it all, but you get sucked into it. Just kind of like you're saying, like how that impacts the psychologically seated fear of everything. If it's done right, and you can relate your audience to your character and make your audience feel like they are that character, making them personable, making them likable. Those are really good, important character elements. This is not that show. But all of that will help you connect mentally with that character. And then whatever shrinking room, shrinking safe space that you create, that reader has just intensified not only their fear, but their enjoyment of your product. Because in the end, we are authors talking to authors. The enjoyment of the product is the end game. I want people to enjoy what I wrote, what I write. I want people to enjoy what they watch from us. It's the enjoyment of the product. Makes it dope.
Makes it dope. I that could be an episode in and of itself, in a way. That tirade, we could probably stretch it out into an episode. Not this episode, but another.
No, we're talking about this episode, but yeah.
Another episode. We should go deeper into that. Using setting to amplify psychological horror. Let's add disorientation to that. A setting that confuses or disorients, like a maze-like structure, like the playable trailer for Silent Hills, which you can't download anymore, which is super sad. A forest where all the paths look the same, or a house where the rooms change. Playable trailer. Can heighten psychological tension in the sense that it's the unexpected. It's not just unknown, but it's the unexpected portion of the unknown.
Even further than that, to add one to that, it's when you can no longer trust yourself, right? Like there's a table in front of me. I can touch that table. That is a table. This is indeed a cup. There is water in it. Yes, YouTube is only water, I promise. You can touch this cup. This is indeed a cup. I know this for a fact. When you start to create doubt in what is around me, in my environment, I doubt if this is really my space. I doubt whether or not this is my house, because I left to go to the grocery store, came home, and an entire family was in this house. I'm like, wait a minute, what is this family doing in my house? Is it my house? Sure, it's my address. I lived here. I thought I lived here. I remember me being here. My card has this. Wait a minute. Why does my ID have a different address in it? That's not even, now you start to change things around you. You no longer trust what you know to be true. And that doubt impacts everything. Because now you can put the most obvious thing in front of somebody. There can clearly be 4 lights, and someone can tell you 5, and eventually you'll believe it. It's a Star Trek.
The surreal and uncanny. Absolutely.
It opens gaslighting and other psychological effects. If you have an antagonist, utilizing all of those things that you and I think you and I may have been talking about Unsane the other day, the iPhone movie. It's and that's one of the things, she was gaslit the whole time by her.
That's a whole other episode. Is psychological.
But that's what helps throw off everything around her, because now she doesn't trust. Is this the person? Am I crazy? Is this really what's going on around me? It's like when you're unsure, it throws everything into chaos. And essentially, if your space, like we mentioned the shrinking space, if your shrinking space is the size of just you, and you can no longer trust you have no safe space.
Which is terrible.
And all bets are off.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing scarier than not trusting yourself.
Yes. That is well put. I have like movies and stuff like running through my head where they either meet the criteria or they do not meet the criteria, and that takes more thought than
the show has time for.
Then the show has time. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's exactly the point, though. Like the fact that you can sit there, as I was mentioning it, you're like, that movie, this show, this book, that show, this movie, and it hits. That's how common it is. There's a reason for it. I know a lot of times, and this is a side note, and I'll come back. I'll slide back. Give me 30 seconds.
Okay.
As much as we want to avoid tropes so that our piece stands out, so that our piece feels unique, and we stand out as writers, you have to understand at some point the tropes are popular for a reason, because people relate to it, meaning they understand it on a deeper level. Less work for you to necessarily have to do with the pen, because a lot of the other work that you have to do is inherent. So utilize those tropes. Don't be afraid of them. Don't rely on them completely. Do your own unique spin on the trope. But make sure you use the tropes, because they're there and they're popular for a reason, because they work, because people understand them. That might have been 30.
Okay. I might talk about that a little more in depth here as we move on with the thing, but that is a very good point, and warrants some deep diving.
I can't swim, but that would be too far.
So I thought I'd move on to symbolism in setting.
Okay.
You can reflect the character's mind, like the cell was an excellent portrayal of that, almost literal portrayal of that. What does the inside of a serial killer's head look like?
That I always have nothing to say because you mentioned the cell. If you've not seen the cell,
You gotta.
finish this episode, go find it somewhere, watch it twice. I can't even.
The art direction alone will make it worth watching. But if you're a horror fan, it has a special place in my heart.
It is one of the. It doesn't get anywhere near the appreciation in horror that it deserves. I haven't seen it in a while, so this might just be like my memory of it from like the nostalgic point in time. But I remember the colors. The colors. It's not what you typically would expect from anything psychological, like thriller, horror, whatever. Because everything's always so dark and grimy and monotone to some degree. And a lot of that has to do with focusing attention somewhere else. So they drown out that color, but the sound.
Yeah.
But yeah, great depiction of how disjointed a serial killer's mind has to be. I think disjointed is one of the best words I can think of for that. Because what leads a person to think like that? Like imagine the Joker. Batman's not horror, but I put Joker, like the movie Joker with like Joaquin Phoenix, and the character of the Joker. I put that as a horror character. He's like a crowning horror character. And trying to picture his mind and how things throw off there.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like back to the symbolism thing, like the setting can reflect the inside of the character's mind. Like that's kind of where I was getting at with the cell. For instance, a crumbling house might reflect a character's deteriorating mental state. The pace the reveal of the setting. So we talked about having the background like nailed for our settings, right? So the viewer should know only so much as the character knows. So do a gradual how did I put this? Unveil the setting slowly. Allow characters and readers to discover new parts of the environment over time, each revealing more and more the horror that lies within.
It's important to understand pacing, as you mentioned. And since everything comes back to wrestling, there was a video of Stephen Amell, the guy who plays Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he got into wrestling for a little while, and he did this. There's a clip of him talking about the advice he got from Triple H when he was doing a match. He's like, so when you get out there, slow it down. When you think you're going as slow as you can go, slow it down. And when you think that you're going as slow as humanly possible, slow it down. And the point is to take your time to build. That's what I'm connected to. Take your time to build that environment with your character. If you're exploring a house, go into the room with your character. Then find a reason to slow down and stop in that room. Don't follow the noise right away.
Build mystery.
Exactly.
You know?
I have a big, like, I'll admit, there's one of my writing problems is I want to rush through a thing too quickly because I feel like if I slow it down too much, I'll bore the person to death. It's one of the reasons why I write short stories. I'm afraid to bore my reader.
I am afraid of boring my reader as well. That is my terror.
But there's a thing where when you're reading something and you're like, oh, this is really good, you realize that you're saying that after reading 3 paragraphs of the person's shoe. Like, I wouldn't go 3 paragraphs describing the person's shoe unless there's something really, really special about the shoes. How they feel, and utilize the senses. What's in that room? Why is the room dimly lit? Why is that sound coming from behind that wall where that painting is? And you take a moment to admire the painting. Slow it down. And when you think you're going too slow, slow it down. And when you're going as slow as you possibly can, you humanly can't go any slower, slow it down. In horror, there's obviously going to be a bar, but in horror, taking your time is everything. Stephen Amell mentioned that there was a table spot where he was going to jump through and put someone through a table. He got up on the top rope and jumped. Took him like 2 seconds to do. He said, looking back at it, if I had slowed down and spent 20 seconds climbing up on that top rope, letting the crowd cheer as I got up there, letting the crowd anticipate what was about to happen, let the crowd feel like, oh man, it's going to go. Will he do it? Will he miss it? To take that time to build that suspense, he'd have had a much bigger spot. And he regrets doing it so quickly because he just wanted to get up there and do the spot. He forgot to slow it down. So before you just jump and have the killer run out of the back room, slow it down. Take your time to get to that back room. Explore everything. Draw the reader in.
Keep some aspects of the setting mysterious or hidden until key moments of the story. This creates anticipation and a sense of the unknown. Yet again.
Same thing. I mean, these things come up and repeat for a reason. It's the unknown that creates fear. You go into a new job. You don't know what your coworkers are like, the environment's like, what the job is like in this particular spot. You're nervous. You're fearful. And that's the reason why, because there's the unknown. Kids going to a brand new school. He doesn't know any of those kids. He doesn't know way around the building. That creates fear. It's all about the unknown. The same thing for your character. The trope of the locked door, or that's the room we don't talk about. That's the room we don't go to. That's the house no one visits. No one plays in that field. What about that house on the hill? No one goes up that hill. Talk about it, mention it, forget about it. Let it come back naturally. Naturally, we
Chekhov's gun. Yeah.
Gun. that bothers people so many times. If you set something up, answer all of your questions. Every question
all of your questions.
Every question that you've asked as a writer needs to be answered. That's a fundamental rule, whether you're writing horror, romance, suspense and thrillers, sci-fi, fantasy. If you set up the house on the hill, mention the house on the hill, clarify the house on the hill. If there's a weird box on the shelf, someone's going to open that box.
Okay, so that would be a sudden change. And that is yet another good point about pacing, is introducing sudden changes to the setting that shock or surprise the characters, such as a safe haven turning dangerous or a familiar place becoming alien.
And we touched on all of those elements earlier, whether it's the house changing, the rooms changing order. Why is it super bright outside when it should be midnight? Where am I? Kind of things. It's again disorientation. When you should be here, you end up over there. That's unsettling. Anything that can happen to you and make you feel unsettled, same thing for your character, same thing for your reader. Those are the kind of moments you want to recreate.
I recommend making it as mundane as possible. Anchoring the setting in realism is what I'm trying to get at. Research and authenticity. If your setting is based on a real location or culture, ensure that it's portrayed accurately. Realistic details make the horror more believable and immersive, right? So, yeah. The other point would be consistency. So, maintain internal consistency in your setting. Even if it's fantastical, the rules governing the environment should be clear and adhered to, making the horror feel grounded.
2 quick points. First and foremost, once a rule applies, the rule applies, just like you said. Keep track of things in a journal, in a Bible, in a notebook, whatever. As you're writing the story, if you're creating a fantasy book or a set of monsters and demons with certain powers or whatever, make note of that so that it always happens, it's consistent. When those kind of things no longer work, your reader notices, the viewer notices, and it takes them out of the story because now they have to pause and say, wait a minute, when that happened earlier, this happened. This exact same thing happened later, but now that happened. If you're going to do that on purpose, there has to be a difference that maybe your character wasn't previously aware of. But create that. Make sure that is mentioned. I wouldn't start trying to switch things up too much because then you just lose it. The other point, I just went quickly, do not be afraid to ask questions to other people when writing your story and working those details out. If, like, I'm a guy, I would say things a certain way because I'm a guy. Women would look at the same situation and maybe phrase it and say it differently. If you're writing a character that's a woman and you got a female writer, friend, whatever, hey, don't hesitate to be like, hey, Sako, I wrote this female character out. I'm not sure if this is how she would say this. What are your thoughts on this? I've made that phone call.
Sensitivity reading, as it were.
And there's a lot of people who will be like, oh, I don't want to do sensitive. I don't want to be sensitive. Stop. Pause. That's not what any of this is about. It's about accuracy and honesty, right? There have been several times that I've asked questions of women like, how would a woman approach this situation? Because I think like a guy, because I am one. So I ask a woman, different women, how would you approach the situation? How would you approach the situation? And I have my character reflect that. People turn to me because they're like, well, how would an African-American interact in this situation? And I give them my thoughts. Or they'll ask me, and it's not even about like, oh, does this hurt your feelings? Maybe you don't care. That's between you and God. I got nothing to do with that. But if you want your piece to be grounded in realism, which you do, grounded in reality, like Sako said, find someone who's really gone through that struggle, someone who really does that job, someone who really has done that thing. Ask questions, do the research. These people would, most of the time, I'd say 7 out of 10 times, you're going to find somebody who will have zero issue giving you up to an hour of just answering those kind of questions, because then they feel seen. And if you represent it properly, it's a win. It's an instant win. Not as quick as I thought it would be. But
well, 2 points that were definitely worth making. my concept of anchoring the setting in realism is I wrote a story about a bunch of high school kids, right? In anywhere America, all the rules that apply to us apply to them. And I made the conflict in this story a high school student who was a serial killer and then sold the bodies to necrophiliacs. And in a setting that is saccharine, that is very grounded, very down to earth, this would be earth shattering. This like the disappearance of people and the fact that there's a serial killer in this neighborhood, which means the safe space is gone, right? So I feel like the more mundane the setting or the victim or whatever, the more horrific your bit of horror is going to seem. The contrast. So the farther you push it, the more successful I think it'll be.
I agree completely. Because if you're here, safe neighborhood, safe schools, safe job, safe place, and then Belko experiment. Belko experiment. Everyone's at work. Everyone's just having their regular jokey day at the office, and then next thing you know, there's a voice going over the PA saying, "Hey, you're going to have to kill your coworkers." Like, this is ridiculous. This is just a joke. And the windows all shut down, and they're trapped inside a steel building. They're like, "Oh, well, okay." You never picture that happening in an office building. It happened in the Belko experiment, which is a great movie. I wish they'd do a sequel.
Okay.
So anyone involved with the Belko experiment, we're waiting on number 2.
We're waiting on number 2. I got one more point basically to make regarding this setting within the story, and that is the fact that we are talking about making your setting into its own character, right? You're not personifying it by any means, but you're giving it the backstory. You're giving it growth and as a character, and I'm going to talk about the ways that it'll grow. So let the setting evolve as the story progresses. Perhaps the weather worsens, the physical environment deteriorates, or the supernatural elements become more pronounced.
Yeah. And that's usually ticking clock.
Right. Reflect the stakes. Right? So as the tension escalates, the setting should reflect the increasing stakes. For example, a once safe home may become a trap, or a tranquil town might descend into chaos.
And those are fantastic examples. If you notice that the clouds keep coming in and out, I'm using the natural light from outside. But it could be like that. It could be like bright daylight at the beginning, and then as trouble starts to happen, it gets dimmer. Clouds come. It starts to rain a little bit, and no one really pays attention to the rain. It's just little things are wet, and it's just like little puddles here and there. Then as you're really getting towards the climax, the storm hits. Or it's not horror, but the day after tomorrow.
It's like drama, horror-ish.
I mean, if most of the country is going to be under ice, that seems pretty horrific to me.
Yeah.
But you know the storm is coming. They tell you the storm is coming. And then you start to see the signs that the storm is coming. It gets a little bit chillier, a little bit colder, and then things start to flood a little bit. And like she said, as the tension rises, in that case, so does the ocean water levels. And it's just those kinds of moments. Make sure that you can have a static scene, but realistically, if you have a static scene, nothing's really happening. Your environment is no longer playing a part of what you're doing. If you're going to have and really, really best utilize your setting, make sure that your setting is going through a character arc almost. I guess is the best way of describing it. It's changing as the story changes. It changes along with your character. It changes along with your drama. It changes along with your conflict. So, and especially if you're going to have the conflict intertwined with the environment somehow, something bad happening because of the storm, something like the house is approaching midnight, like I think in 13 Ghosts, there's like a time frame and there's a ticking clock with that. Utilize the concept of the ticking clock with your environment. In 24 hours, the volcano is going to explode. Stuff like that. And it's a really good way of having your characters being forced to make decisions they may not have otherwise made. I know the frustration of having a character or watching a character and saying, why would they do that? Why would they go left into that house? But if the killer shows up on the front porch, that explains it. I am a huge fan of the movie Scream. I talk about Scream all the time. And if you're watching that first time that Sidney Prescott is talking to Ghostface over the phone, she talks about the cliched big-breasted blonde who runs up the stairs when she should be going out the door. Well, she was supposed to go out the door, Sidney Prescott. She couldn't. The door was jammed and locked. And the killer was right there. The most immediate space for her to go was upstairs. So it's a trope reflecting movie. It's a meta movie is a term we use now. But ultimately, you are trying to utilize that environment to force your characters into doing what they wouldn't otherwise normally do. Otherwise, it's like, well, of course you'd get into the running car and drive away. But if they've washed out the roads in a flood, or if the setting has the tree blocking the road, whatever, now you have an excuse for them not to get in the car and drive away, which is the obvious thing for characters to do. Helps to move your characters into the drama, the conflict, even though the answer, the solution is right there. So really, really good examples of how to use the setting that some people just kind of throw away. It's like, oh, it's a happy little town in USA. Use the setting, use the environment, use the weather, use this and that, all part of the overall ambiance of the place to help drive your story. Because we all interact differently when it's raining or snowing outside. Use that. It's relatable. Like we said before, if it's relatable to your reader, relatable to your character, it all makes sense and the story progresses, no matter how zany that ends up being. Welcome back. You're muted still.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that summarized the episode and then some, just a just a little bit. And yeah. I think I had fun. Did you have fun?
I love that. That was a great episode.
It was a great episode. I absolutely agree. So if you happened to like this video at any point, we have this other video where echo.
Oh, really?
Ooh. Oh, just a little bit. We have this other video where Dirty Magic Magazine's owner Charlie Brown talks about the importance of setting. So that'll be down this way. And then so check that out, and we'll see you guys next week when we interview author J.M. Seeley. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. And we'll catch you on the flip side.